The wind was a blade against the cottage walls. Nessa huddled closer to the dying embers in the hearth, pulling a threadbare blanket tighter around her shoulders. It did little to stop the visceral cold that had sunk into her bones weeks ago. Hunger was a familiar ache, a dull, constant companion in her gut. Her last piece of bread, hard as a rock, sat on the rickety table. It was meant to be her meal for the next 2 days, carefully rationed. Then came the scratching at the door, a desperate, splintering sound almost lost in the howl of the blizzard. Fear, sharp and cold, shot through her. No one came to her cottage on the edge of the Wailing Woods, not since her Aunt Morwen had cast her out, branding her with whispers of being cursed and ill-fated. The villagers avoided this place, crossing themselves if they strayed too near. The scratching came again, weaker this time, followed by a heavy thud. It wasn't the sound of a person. It was the sound of a body. Hesitantly, Nessa rose, her joints protesting. She crept to the door, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Peering through a crack in the weathered wood, she saw it. A wolf. But it was a creature of impossible size. A colossal beast draped in fur as black as a starless night. It lay half-collapsed in the snow, a dark, ragged wound gaping in its flank, staining the pure white a sickening crimson. Its breath plumed in weak, shallow clouds. It was dying. Every instinct screamed at her to leave it, to bolt the door and pretend she had seen nothing. A wolf was a wolf, a predator. But this one, its ragged breathing tore at something deep inside her, a strange, resonant pity she couldn't ignore. It looked not like a monster, but like a fallen king. With a trembling hand, she unlatched the door. The wind shrieked, throwing a cascade of snow into the small room and extinguishing the last of the embers. Darkness and a biting chill flooded the space. The wolf made no move. Its great head was lowered, and a low, pained whine escaped its throat. Nessa's fear warred with a bizarre, overwhelming compulsion to help. It was madness. She had nothing. She was starving herself. What could she possibly offer a creature of this magnitude? Yet, she found herself moving, grabbing the end of its massive, fur-matted leg. It was like trying to move a boulder. She strained, her muscles screaming in protest, her bare feet slipping on the snow-dusted floorboards. Inch by painful inch, she dragged the enormous animal across the threshold, finally managing to heave its hindquarters inside before collapsing against the now-closed door, her body shaking with cold and exertion. In the gloom, she could just make out its form. It was even larger up close, a creature of nightmare and legend. Its fur was thick with ice and blood. The wound in its side was a brutal, deep gash, crusted with frozen gore. It smelled of pine, of cold stone, and of fresh, spilled blood. She lit her last candle, the small flame throwing dancing, monstrous shadows across the walls. The wolf's eyes were closed, but a low growl rumbled in its chest as she approached with a wet rag, her only clean one. "I won't hurt you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Was she speaking to the wolf or to herself? She gently began to clean the wound, wincing in sympathy as the beast's muscles clenched beneath her touch. The flesh was torn savagely, the work of claws longer and thicker than her fingers. As her skin made contact with its fur, a strange, unexpected warmth bloomed in her palm, a tingling heat that seemed to flow from her into the wolf. It was a bizarre sensation, like pouring her own life force into it. The growling subsided, replaced by another low whine, this one less of pain and more of something else, something that felt like recognition. Once the wound was as clean as she could make it, she saw the sheer exhaustion in the animal's posture. It was depleted, not just from its injury, but from starvation. She could see it in the slight hollows beneath its ribs, a familiar sight she often saw in her own reflection. Without a second thought, she turned to the table. Her last piece of bread. Her survival for 2 more days. She took it, broke it into smaller pieces, and soaked them in the little water she had left in her bucket. The hard crust softened into a meager, pulpy mash. She knelt by the wolf's head, holding out her trembling hand with the offering. Its massive head lifted slightly, and one eye, a slit of luminous, molten gold, cracked open. The intensity of that gaze struck her like a physical blow. It was ancient, intelligent, and held a power that stole the air from her lungs. This was no ordinary animal. For a terrifying moment, she thought it would lunge, would tear her throat out for her foolishness. Instead, a long, black tongue snaked out and delicately licked the mash from her palm. The touch was rough, yet impossibly gentle. When it was gone, the tongue swept over her empty palm once more, a gesture that felt less like an animal's instinct and more like a solemn vow. Then, its head fell back to the floor, and it slipped into a deep, unconscious slumber. Nessa sat back on her heels, the warmth from her hands now a faint, humming memory. She had just given her last meal to a monster from the woods. She was surely going to die now, either from starvation or when her guest awoke with its hunger renewed. Wrapping herself in the thin blanket, she slumped into a corner, too exhausted and cold to move, and watched the slow, steady rise and fall of the great wolf's chest until her own eyes drifted shut. She awoke not to the cold, but to an oppressive, suffocating heat. The tiny cottage felt charged with a potent, masculine energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The first thing she saw was the man. He was kneeling by the hearth, a roaring fire now blazing within it, casting his formidable silhouette against the opposite wall. He was naked, his back a stunning landscape of corded muscle and scarred skin. Broad shoulders tapered to a narrow waist, his body a testament to brutal strength and lethal grace. His hair was as black as the wolf's fur, damp and clinging to his neck. As if sensing her gaze, he turned his head. The face was one of harsh, aristocratic beauty, all sharp angles and unforgiving planes. But it was his eyes that made her freeze. They were the same eyes, the same luminous, molten gold, burning with an intelligence that was terrifyingly human. He was the wolf. The realization crashed into her with the force of a physical impact. She scrambled backward, a strangled gasp escaping her lips as her back hit the cold, rough wall. He rose to his full, towering height, a motion of fluid power that seemed to shrink the small room into insignificance. He was a giant, carved from stone and shadow, and she was trapped with him. Utterly trapped. "You are afraid," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and up her spine. It was not a question. Nessa could only nod, her throat tight with terror. He took a step toward her, and she flinched, pressing herself harder against the wall. A flicker of something, frustration, perhaps pain, crossed his severe features. He stopped. He looked down at his side where the grievous wound had been. Now only a thin, pink scar remained, a faint line against his tanned skin. It was already healing, impossibly fast. "You did this," he said, his golden eyes fixing on her hands. "The warmth, the light. I felt it. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, hiding her hands in the folds of her ragged dress. "No," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her thin frame, the hollows of her cheeks, the threadbare poverty of her existence. A low, guttural growl rose in his chest, a sound of pure, predatory rage. It was not directed at her. It was directed at her suffering. "Of course you don't. They left you here to waste away. They hid you from me." "Who did?" she whispered, confused and terrified. "Who are you?" He ignored her question, his focus absolute, his stare so intense it felt like a physical touch, a brand against her skin. "My wolf knew. The moment you touched me. He has been howling your name since the day I was born, and I never knew why. I was dying in your doorway, and your scent, it was the only thing that pulled me from the edge." He took another slow, deliberate step. "Mine." The word was a visceral shock, a claim spoken with the weight of absolute certainty. It echoed in the small room, in the very marrow of her bones. A strange, terrifying heat flared deep within her, a response to his declaration that she could not control. It felt like a string being pulled taut between them. "I don't belong to anyone," she managed to say, her voice shaking but laced with a defiance she didn't know she possessed. A humorless smile touched his lips. "You do not have a choice in this. Neither do I." He gestured to the empty space on the floor where he had lain as a wolf. "You gave a dying beast your last piece of bread. You are my mate, Nessa." He knew her name. The final piece of the terrifying puzzle slotted into place, and her world tilted on its axis. How could he possibly know her name? Before she could ask, the cottage door burst open. Two men, clad in thick black furs and carrying swords, filled the doorway, their eyes wide with alarm. Their gazes fell upon the naked man, and they immediately dropped to one knee, bowing their heads. "Alpha King," the taller one said, his voice filled with relief. "We tracked your blood. We thought—" "I am fine, Garrett," the Alpha King, Ronan said, his voice sharp with command. He did not look away from Nessa. "Bring a cloak and provisions. We are leaving." The man named Garrett finally looked at Nessa, his expression shifting from relief to utter confusion. He saw a slip of a girl, practically a waif, cowering in the corner. He looked back at his king, who stood before her like a mountain shielding a sapling. "My king?" Garrett questioned, his brow furrowed. "You have your orders," Ronan snapped, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The Luna is cold." Luna. Queen. The word hung in the air, as impossible and terrifying as everything else. Garrett scrambled to obey, disappearing for a moment, before returning with a heavy fur cloak. Ronan took it and strode toward Nessa. She flinched again, but his movements were surprisingly gentle as he wrapped the impossibly soft, warm fur around her thin shoulders. The scent of him, pine and winter and raw power, enveloped her. "I have you," he murmured, his voice for her ears only. The possessiveness in those words was a cage and a promise all at once. He scooped her up into his arms, as if she weighed nothing. Her head spun, the sudden proximity to his bare, muscular chest overwhelming her senses. She was too weak, too starved, too shocked to fight. He carried her out of the dilapidated cottage, her home and her prison, and into the cold light of dawn. The blizzard had passed. A retinue of grim-faced warriors stood waiting with horses, their gazes a mixture of awe and bewilderment. They were all looking at her, this nobody, cradled in the arms of their formidable king. Ronan mounted a massive black warhorse in a single fluid movement, settling her in front of him. She was pressed against his hard, warm body, a shield against the world. He was the monster from the forest, the king of all wolves, and he had just stolen her from the only life she had ever known. The journey to Blackwood Keep was a blur of speed and suffocating proximity. Nessa was trapped between the unyielding wall of Ronan's chest and the powerful neck of his warhorse. The world flew by in a smear of snow-laden pines and gray sky. The cold could not touch her, insulated as she was by his body heat and the luxurious fur cloak. But a different kind of chill, one of pure dread, had settled deep within her. She was a prisoner, a prize. He had called her his mate, his Luna. The words meant nothing to her, yet they had sealed her fate. Blackwood Keep rose from the mountainside like a spike of jagged black stone, a fortress of daunting towers and imposing walls that seemed to drink the very light from the sky. It was a place of power, of brutal and ancient authority, and it terrified her. As they passed through the colossal gates, warriors and servants stopped and stared, their faces a mixture of shock and reverence as they saw their king with a strange woman in his arms. The whispers followed them like rustling leaves. Ronan ignored them all, his strides long and purposeful, as he carried her through vast, echoing halls hung with faded tapestries and the mounted heads of great beasts. He took her up a winding stone staircase into what was clearly his personal domain. The chambers were vast and masculine, dominated by a huge hearth, a massive bed draped in black wolf pelts, and shelves overflowing with books and scrolls. He finally set her down on her feet before the roaring fire, but kept his hands firmly on her shoulders, as if afraid she might bolt. "You are safe here," he declared, his golden eyes scanning her face, searching for something. "Safe?" she echoed, her voice trembling. "I'm your prisoner." "You are my queen," he corrected her, his tone harsh. "You are the other half of my soul, and I will have you understand that. You will want for nothing. You will be protected. You will never be cold or hungry again." He gestured to a table laden with food that must have been brought up while they were en route. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and wine. The sight and smell of it made her stomach cramp with a painful, desperate hunger. Before she could react, an elderly woman entered the room, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and intelligent. She bowed her head to Ronan. "My king, Garrett sent for me." "Elspeth," Ronan acknowledged, his grip on Nessa's shoulders softening slightly. "This is she, the one the prophecies foretold." The healer, Elspeth, turned her piercing gaze on Nessa. She walked forward, her eyes scanning Nessa from head to toe. Nessa felt like a specimen under inspection. Elspeth reached out a gnarled hand and gently took Nessa's chin, tilting her face to the light. "So thin," the old woman murmured, her thumb stroking Nessa's cheek. "But the light is there, faint, sleeping. But it's there." She looked at Ronan. "It is a miracle she survived at all, let alone with her spirit intact." She then focused on Nessa again, her expression softening. "Child, do you know what you are?" Nessa shook her head, overwhelmed. I'm nobody." "You are the mate of the Alpha King," Elspeth said gently. "A bond fated by the moon goddess herself. It is a connection of the soul. His wolf knew you the moment you laid hands on him. The bond is why you felt the need to help him, and it is why your touch began to heal him, even in your weakened state." This was too much. Magic, prophecies, fated mates. It sounded like a mad woman's rambling. My touch did nothing, Nessa insisted. I just cleaned the wound. Elspeth smiled knowingly. Did you not feel the warmth in your hands? A transference of energy? That, little one, was the nascent stirrings of your power, called forth by the presence of your mate. The old woman's eyes became more serious. The bond is not yet complete. It is a raw, open connection between you. It will cause complications, pain, until it is formally sealed by the claiming. The claiming, Nessa whispered, the word tasting like a threat. It was Ronan who answered, his voice a low growl. When I mark you, when I bite you, and make you fully mine. The raw possession in his tone made her shiver. He wanted to bite her, like an animal. No, Nessa breathed, taking a step back, but his hands were still on her shoulders, holding her in place. You can't. It must be done, Elspeth said, her voice firm but kind. An incomplete bond is a dangerous thing, child. It will drive the alpha to madness. His instincts will scream at him to claim you, to protect you, to merge your souls. To deny it is to invite a pain you cannot imagine, for both of you. Nessa's mind reeled. This was her life now? To be a cure for this man's madness? To be bitten and claimed like property? She looked from Ronan's intense, predatory face to Elspeth's sympathetic one. Why me? I'm nothing special. I lived in a hovel and ate scraps. My own aunt threw me out. At the mention of her aunt, a lethal darkness crossed Ronan's face. Your aunt, he snarled. She will answer for what she has done to you, for hiding a treasure in the mud. He looked at Elspeth. Tell her what she is. Elspeth's gaze on Nessa became one of profound reverence. Your bloodline is almost lost to history, child. You are descended from the sun wolves, the luminaries, while our king's line, the shadow wolves, commands the darkness and the hunt. Yours commands life and light. Your kind were healers, nurturers, the bringers of balance. It was said a luminary's presence could make the crops grow and heal the sick with a touch. For centuries, we have believed them to be extinct. Nessa stared at her, speechless. A sun wolf? A luminary? It was a fairy tale. That's not possible. My parents were simple people, woodcutters. Power can lie dormant for generations, waiting for the right catalyst to awaken it, Elspeth explained. Your fated mate, an alpha of immense power, is that catalyst. Your aunt must have known. She must have sensed your potential and sought to suppress it, to keep you weak and hidden, terrified of your own nature. It was too much to absorb. Nessa felt dizzy, the room seeming to tilt around her. Ronan's hands tightened, steadying her. His presence was an anchor, even as it was the source of her terror. Eat, he commanded softly, guiding her to the chair by the table. You are starving. We will speak more later. Too exhausted to argue further, she sat. She picked up a piece of bread, soft, fresh bread, and took a bite. The simple taste was so overwhelming after months of near starvation that tears sprang to her eyes. She ate ravenously, barely aware of Ronan watching her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of fierce satisfaction and a terrible, simmering rage for the life she had been forced to live. She was in a gilded cage, but for the first time in a year, she was not hungry. It was a terrifying and seductive trade. The days that followed were a disorienting blend of opulence and confinement. Nessa was kept within Ronan's chambers, a luxurious prison of soft furs, crackling fires, and endless food. She saw no one but him and Elspeth. The old healer would visit daily. bringing her books on their people's history, telling her tales of the fated bond and the legendary luminaries. Nessa read the words, listened to the stories, but a part of her remained detached, unable to accept that these grand legends had anything to do with her. The bond, however, was not so easily dismissed. It was a constant, thrumming presence beneath her skin. Sometimes it was a gentle warmth, a feeling of contentment that she knew was not her own, but Ronan's, as he sat across the room watching her. Other times, it was a sharp, agonizing spike of pain. One afternoon, she cried out, clutching her head as a wave of searing rage and frustration washed over her, so potent it brought her to her knees. Moments later, Ronan burst into the room, his eyes wild. "What is it? Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands checking her for injuries. "It was you," she gasped, pushing him away. I felt your anger." His expression hardened. "The council questions my judgment. They see only a thin, frightened girl. They do not see the fire within you." He slammed his fist against the stone wall, and the impact shuddered through the room. "They think you will be a weak Luna." "Maybe they're right," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "No," he growled, turning back to her, his face a mask of furious certainty. He stalked towards her and cupped her face in his large, warm hands. "Your fire is sleeping, but I feel it. It calls to the darkness in me. You are my balance. Without you, my rage consumes everything. For years I have been fighting to control the feral beast within me, a beast driven mad by the absence of its mate. That agony, it ends with you." It was the first time he had truly shown her his vulnerability. Beneath the iron command and the predatory possession, there was a deep, desperate need. He was not just a king claiming his prize. He was a man on the verge of breaking, and he believed she was the only one who could hold him together. The revelation was terrifying, but it also planted a tiny, reluctant seed of empathy within her. She was beginning to see the man behind the monster. The pressure from his counsel mounted. Ronan was forced to convene a formal hearing. He insisted Nessa be present, standing beside his throne, a silent and terrified observer. The hall was filled with grim-faced, powerful shifters, his highest-ranking alphas and betas. One of them, a silver-haired elder named Lord Valerius, rose to speak, his voice dripping with condescension. "Alpha King," Valerius began, his gaze flicking dismissively over Nessa. "We rejoice in your recovery and in the discovery of your fated mate. However, the pack requires a strong Luna, a queen of noble blood and proven strength. This, child, is a foundling, a nameless waif you pulled from a mud hut. She has no standing, no power. She will bring weakness to your reign." A low growl vibrated through Ronan's chest, a sound that made the very stones of the hall tremble. The air grew thick and heavy with his power. "Be careful, Valerius," Ronan warned, his voice dangerously soft. "You speak of your queen. I speak of the future of this pack," Valerius countered, emboldened by his own arrogance. "She is human, or near enough, frail, unworthy to stand beside you. The bond may be real, but it is a mistake of the goddess. We urge you to set her aside. Find a proper mate." The room fell into a dead, expectant silence. Nessa felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, judging her, dismissing her. Humiliation burned in her cheeks. She wanted to shrink away, to disappear. Ronan rose slowly from his throne, His molten gold eyes were no longer human. They were the burning, feral eyes of the alpha wolf, and they were fixed on Valerius with lethal intent. "She is not human," Ronan snarled, his voice a tidal wave of absolute authority that crashed over the assembly. "She is luminary. Her blood is more ancient and powerful than any in this hall. You see weakness because your eyes are clouded by ignorance and ambition." He took a step forward, and Valerius, for all his blustering, involuntarily took a step back. "You will address her as my queen. You will show her the respect you show me. Her word is my word. An insult to her is an act of treason against me." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "And treason is paid for in blood. Do you understand me, Lord Valerius?" The elder's face was pale, his bravado shattered. He bowed his head low, his body trembling. "Yes, Alpha King, I understand." "Good," Ronan said, his voice returning to a semblance of calm, but the menace remained. He turned his gaze back to Nessa, and for a fleeting moment she saw not a tyrant, but a fierce protector. He was defending her. He was fighting for her. The thought was as unsettling as it was strangely comforting. That night, the bond flared with a new kind of intensity. It was no longer just random spikes of emotion. It was a constant, aching pull, a deep, hollow loneliness when he was not in the room. They shared a dream, a vision of a sun-drenched meadow where two wolves, one of shadow and one of light, chased each other in a playful, endless dance. She woke with a gasp, her heart pounding, the feeling of his presence so real it was a physical ache. Ronan was standing by the window, staring out at the moonlit landscape. He turned, his face etched with a pain that mirrored her own. "You felt it too," he stated. She nodded, clutching the furs of the bed. "The meadow, our souls are calling to each other," he said, his voice raw. "They wish to be whole. This separation, it is a violation of nature, Nessa. It is killing me." He walked to the bed and sat on the edge, his proximity making her skin tingle. He reached out, not to grab, but to gently take her hand. His thumb stroked over her knuckles. "I know you are afraid. I have been a beast. I have commanded and claimed when I should have courted. But I do not know how to be gentle with this. You are the first thing in my entire life that I have been terrified of losing." His confession hung between them, a fragile, breathtaking thing. She looked into his golden eyes and saw not a king or a wolf, but a man laid bare, his heart in his hands. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but for the first time, another feeling stirred beside it. A tentative, fluttering warmth. Just as this fragile truce began to form, a messenger arrived, breathless and grim. There was trouble at the northern border. A rival pack, the Stonefangs, were raiding villages, a brazen act of aggression. It was a direct challenge to Ronan's authority. "I must go," Ronan said, his jaw tight with fury. The king was back, the vulnerable man gone. "The pack needs its alpha." "No," Nessa heard herself say, the words slipping out before she could stop it. The thought of him leaving sent a sharp, inexplicable panic through her. The bond. It was screaming at the prospect of separation. He looked at her, his expression softening for a moment. "I will not be long. You will be safe here. I will leave Garrett and a dozen of my best royal guard. No one will get through these walls." He tilted her chin up, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "Wait for me." He was gone by morning. The keep felt hollow without his overwhelming presence. The silence in his chambers was deafening. The bond stretched thin and taut, a constant, agonizing hum of distance and worry. Nessa paced the room like a caged animal, feeling his frustration, his rage, and his deep, primal worry for her, all filtering through their incomplete connection. 2 days passed. The solitude was maddening. Nessa tried to read, but the words blurred. She tried to sleep, but her dreams were filled with shadows and the feeling of being watched. On the third night, a storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil inside her. A sudden, unnatural quiet fell over the corridor outside her chambers. The footsteps of the guards, the familiar sounds of the keep, all vanished. An icy dread trickled down her spine. Something was wrong. The lock on her door clicked softly. The heavy oak swung inward, revealing a figure cloaked in dark, ragged robes. The figure lowered her hood, and Nessa's blood ran cold. "Aunt Morwen," she breathed. Her aunt's face was a twisted mask of envy and spite. Her eyes, small and cruel, raked over Nessa, taking in the fine silk nightgown she wore, the luxurious room she stood in. "Well, well, look at the little curse, playing queen in a castle." "How did you get in here?" Nessa demanded, backing away. "The guards." "Dealt with," Morwen sneered, revealing a small, intricately carved bone in her hand. It pulsed with a faint, sickly green light. "A little gift from the Stone-Fang shaman. A sleeping spell. Your precious king's guards are dreaming like babies." She took a step into the room, a long, thin dagger glinting in her other hand. The blade was a dull, sickly silver. "I heard the news. The great Alpha King found his fated mate. A little wretch I threw out to die. Imagine my surprise." "Ah, why are you here?" Nessa's voice trembled. "To finish what I started!" Morwen shrieked, her face contorting with rage. "Your mother was a fool, a luminary who bound her own power, who married a common woodcutter and thought she could hide. But I knew. I always knew what was sleeping in your blood. I was supposed to be the guardian of the family magic, but it chose your insipid mother, and then it chose you. I tried to smother it, to starve it out of you, but the king's bond has awakened it." Morwen lunged. Nessa cried out and scrambled away, knocking over a small table. "He will kill you for this." "He is miles away, fighting a battle I helped orchestrate," Morwen cackled, stalking her around the room. "By the time he returns, his precious little mate will be gone, and her power will be mine." Morwen lunged again, cornering Nessa against the cold stone of the hearth. She raised the silver dagger. Nessa threw her hands up in a desperate, instinctual gesture of defense. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the searing pain. It never came. Instead, a blinding, brilliant wave of golden light erupted from her palms. It was pure, searing energy, smelling of sunshine and summer ozone. The wave of force slammed into Morwen, throwing her backward across the room with a shriek of pain and surprise. She crashed into the far wall and slid to the floor, the silver dagger clattering from her grasp and shattering into a dozen pieces against the flagstones. Nessa stared at her own hands, which were glowing with a soft, residual golden light. The warmth, the power she had felt when healing Ronan, was back, magnified 100-fold. It was real. The stories were real. She was a luminary. Miles away, on a blood-soaked battlefield, Ronan froze mid-swing. A wave of pure, undiluted terror, his mate's terror, crashed into him through the bond. It was a psychic scream so potent it staggered him. Following it was a brilliant flash of unfamiliar, immense power. Her power. She was in danger. Garrett! He roared, his voice carrying over the din of battle. His beta appeared at his side, sword dripping with blood. Alpha! The keep! She is being attacked, Ronan snarled, his eyes already glowing with feral light. The battle is a diversion. Finish them. Without another word, he turned, his body already beginning to contort and shift. He threw his head back, and a howl of pure, murderous rage tore from his throat as he abandoned the battle. He broke into a dead run, his human form dissolving into the monstrous, shadowy shape of his wolf form. A black phantom of fury streaking through the forest, drawn by the fraying thread of his bond. He would tear the world apart to get to her. Back in the chamber, Morwen pushed herself up, her face a mask of disbelief and renewed greed. So, it is awake, she hissed, her eyes fixated on Nessa's glowing hands. More powerful than I ever imagined. Before she could make another move, the doors to the chamber exploded inward, blasted from their hinges by a force of raw, physical power. Ronan stood there, framed in the wreckage, no longer a man but a terrifying hybrid of man and beast. His body was immense, covered in shifting black fur, his hands tipped with vicious claws, and his face was a nightmare of fangs and burning golden eyes. He was the Alpha in his war form, a creature of pure, unrestrained wrath. His gaze fell on Nessa, huddled and frightened, but unharmed. Then it shifted to Morwen. A low, deathly growl echoed from his chest, a promise of a slow and brutal end. He launched himself across the room, a pour of shadow and fury. He was on Morwen in a heartbeat, pinning her to the floor, his claws at her throat. "You dare," he snarled, his voice a guttural monstrosity. "You dare touch what is mine." Morwen, terrified and gasping for air, managed a wheezing laugh. "Kill me, and you'll never see your mate's little friend again." Ronan froze, his claws digging slightly into her skin, drawing beads of blood. "What did you say?" "Posy," Morwen choked out, a triumphant, desperate gleam in her eyes. "The little servant girl from the village, the only one who was ever kind to our dear Nessa. I have her, hidden. My allies will kill her on my command, if I don't return by dawn." She stared past Ronan's shoulder at Nessa. "A life for a life. Give me the girl and her friend lives. Refuse and the child dies." Nessa's heart stopped. Posy. Sweet, kind Posy, who used to sneak her scraps of food from the tavern kitchen. The only friend she'd had in a world of cruelty. A cold, determined fury she had never known replaced her fear. She would not let her friend die for her. "Ronan, no," Nessa said, her voice shaking but firm. She stepped forward. "Don't!" Ronan's head snapped toward her, his expression torn between his murderous rage and his desperate need to protect her. "She is bluffing." "Am I?" Morwen rasped. "Your bond can't tell you everything, can it, great king? You can't feel the fear of a simple human girl miles away." He was trapped. His entire being screamed at him to rip this woman apart. But the sliver of a chance she was telling the truth stayed his hand. He could not risk an innocent life, especially one precious to his mate. "I'll go," Nessa said, her voice gaining strength. She looked directly at her aunt, her own eyes, for the first time, holding a spark of the power that now hummed beneath her skin. "Let Posy go, and I will go with you." "Nessa, no!" Ronan roared, turning his furious gaze back on her. "I will not allow it." "You don't have a choice," she replied, her calm unsettling him more than her fear had. She took another step closer, placing a hand on his fur-covered arm. The contact sent a jolt of energy between them. Through the bond, she sent a single, silent, desperate plea. Trust me. Please trust me. He stared at her, his feral mind warring with the message from his soulmate. He saw the steel in her spine, the fire in her eyes. This was not the frightened girl he had taken from the cottage. This was a queen. Reluctantly, with a growl that was a sound of physical pain, he eased his claws from Morwen's throat. "The Shadow Fen ruins!" Morwen gasped, scrambling to her feet. "At midnight, bring the girl, alone. Come with your king, and the friend dies." She gave Nessa one last hateful look before turning and fleeing into the dark corridors. Ronan immediately shifted back to his human form, the transformation violent and swift. He rushed to Nessa, pulling her into his arms, his embrace crushing. "I cannot let you do this." "We don't have a choice," she repeated, her face pressed against his chest. "But she said I have to go alone. She didn't say I had to stay alone." She looked up at him, a desperate plan forming in her mind. "You can follow. You're the Alpha King. You're the greatest hunter in this kingdom. You can follow me without being seen." His eyes blazed with a reluctant admiration. "She will be expecting that." "Then we will give her what she expects," Nessa said, a strange, cold certainty settling over her. "And what she doesn't." She held up her hands, which still pulsed with a faint golden aura. "She wants my power. Let's see what happens when she gets it." The Shadowfen ruins were a skeleton of a forgotten age, broken teeth of stone jutting from a fog-shrouded swamp under a sliver of a moon. The air was thick with the smell of decay and stagnant water. Nessa walked alone into the crumbling central courtyard, her heart a frantic hammer against her ribs. She was terrified, but the steady, reassuring presence of Ronan in the back of her mind, a silent shadow moving through the mists a mile behind her, gave her strength. "I am with you," his voice echoed through the bond. "Always." Morwen stood in the center of the ruins beside a crude stone altar, upon which intricate, ugly symbols had been painted in what looked disturbingly like fresh blood. Two hulking men in stone-fang furs stood behind her, their faces brutal and scarred, and tied to a pillar, gagged and weeping, was Posey. "Posey!" Nessa cried, starting forward. "Not so fast," Morwen snapped, holding up a hand. "The exchange first." She gestured to the altar. "On your knees, place your hands on the stone." Nessa's eyes darted to Posey, whose terrified gaze pleaded with her. She had to do this. Steeling herself, she walked to the altar and did as she was told, kneeling in the dirt and placing her palms flat against the cold, blood-painted stone. The moment she did, the symbols flared with a vile green energy that snaked up her arms, cold and parasitic. It felt like icy leeches sucking the warmth from her. A scream tore from her throat as a wave of agony unlike anything she had ever felt ripped through her. The magic was trying to pull the light from her very soul. "Yes!" Morwen cackled, her eyes wide with manic glee. "Give it to me! All of it!" Nessa felt her consciousness begin to fray, her life force being siphoned away. The golden light within her flickered and dimmed. Through the bond, she felt a cataclysmic surge of rage from Ronan. He was coming, too fast. He would be seen. The trap would spring. "No, wait," she projected, pouring all her will into the thought. In her agony, something shifted. The pain was immense, but beneath it, a deeper power stirred. It was not the gentle warmth of healing. It was a roaring, celestial inferno. It was the sun itself, dormant for generations, now being violently shaken awake. Her aunt wanted her power? Fine. She could have it. All of it. Instead of fighting the parasitic magic, Nessa pushed. She opened the floodgates of her own soul, unleashing the full, untamed torrent of her luminary heritage. A cataclysm of pure white gold light erupted from her. It was not a wave, it was a nova. The sky above the ruins lit up as if a new sun had been born. The green, parasitic magic vaporized instantly, the blood on the altar turning to ash. Morwen screamed as the raw, holy light washed over her, not burning her flesh, but incinerating her dark magic, scouring it from her very being. The two Stonefang warriors cried out, shielding their eyes, stumbling back from the sheer intensity of the blast. Nessa was no longer kneeling. She was rising, levitating inches off the ground, her body a blazing silhouette of unimaginable power. Her hair whipped around her as if in a hurricane, and her eyes were solid, burning orbs of gold. The power was too much, a wild, cosmic ocean threatening to tear her apart, to consume her identity and leave only a mindless, burning star in her place. "Ronan!" she screamed through the bond, a cry for her anchor in the storm. A black wolf, a creature of living shadow and absolute fury, exploded from the fog. He was no longer hiding. He moved with impossible speed, a blur of night against the blinding light. He didn't attack her enemies. He ran straight to her. He leaped onto the altar, ignoring the waves of energy that would have disintegrated a lesser being, and pressed his massive, solid form against her back. "I have you." His voice resonated in her soul, a deep, grounding anchor in the hurricane of light. "Hold on to me." His darkness did not diminish her light. It gave it shape. His solid presence gave her a focal point, a center to the storm. She felt his strength, his unshakable love, his absolute faith in her, pouring into her through the bond. Grounded by his presence, she finally gained control. The wild, explosive energy coalesced, flowing into her, becoming part of her. Her form shifted, the light wrapping around her like a second skin. She was no longer just a woman. A massive, spectral wolf of pure, shimmering silver light formed around her, her human shape a glowing heart within its chest. She had shifted, not into flesh and blood, but into a being of pure energy, a true luminary alpha. She turned her new, incandescent gaze upon her enemies. The two Stonefang warriors, terrified beyond reason, dropped their weapons and fled into the swamp. Morwen, however, was on her knees, her face a ruin of terror and disbelief. Her connection to her stolen dark magic was gone, leaving her empty and powerless. Nessa took a step, her luminous wolf form moving with an ethereal grace. She lowered her great shining head until she was eye to eye with her aunt. She opened her mouth, and her voice was not her own, but a chorus of light and power, ancient and absolute. "You tried to smother the sun," she said. "You only taught it how to burn." With a flick of her spectral head, she sent a single, controlled pulse of energy at the pillar holding Posey. The ropes turned to dust, and the gag fell away. Posey was free. The black wolf at her side, Ronan, let out a low, rumbling growl of profound satisfaction. He stood with her, an alpha of shadow and an alpha of light, a king and his queen, united and whole. The balance was restored. Ronan's justice was as swift as it was cold. Morwen, stripped of her borrowed power and left a shriveled husk of her ambition, was not granted the mercy of a quick death. She was exiled to the withered lands, a barren, magic-dead wasteland on the edge of the kingdom from which no one ever returned. Her name was struck from every record. It was a fate, Ronan declared, worse than any blade. Posey, shaken but unharmed, was brought back to Blackwood Keep and given a place of honor in the Queen's household, her loyalty rewarded beyond her wildest dreams. The pack was in turmoil. News of the battle, of the Luna's abduction, and of the impossible light that had turned night into day over the Shadowfen ruins had spread like wildfire. Whispers turned to awe, and skepticism turned to fervent belief. When Ronan called them to assemble in the Great Hall, every member of the pack attended, their eyes wide with anticipation. He stood before the throne, but he did not take his seat. He stood on the floor with his people. Beside him stood Nessa. She wore a simple gown of deep blue, but there was nothing simple about her now. A quiet, luminous power radiated from her, a calm strength that settled the anxious energy in the room. Her fear was gone, replaced by a serene confidence. She met the stares of Lord Valerius and the other council members not with timidity, but with the steady gaze of a queen. Ronan let the silence stretch, his golden eyes sweeping over the crowd. Finally, he spoke, his voice ringing with power and a profound, raw emotion that held every wolf in the hall captive. "You questioned my choice," he began, his gaze landing on Valerius, who flinched. "You saw a weak girl. You saw a mistake. You were blind. I was just as blind." He turned his body slightly to face Nessa, his expression softening into one of utter reverence. "I thought I was rescuing a victim. I thought I was claiming what was mine by right of destiny." He reached out and took her hand, his large, calloused fingers lacing through hers. He looked from her face to the assembled pack, a deep, wondering smile touching his lips. "You fed a dying wolf at your door, little one," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble that nonetheless carried to every corner of the hall. "You were not giving charity. You were calling your king home." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The sheer, heartfelt power of his declaration silenced all doubt. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of fealty that stunned the onlookers, a king bowing to his queen. Then he turned fully to her, his eyes blazing with love and primal need. "The bond is not complete. My soul cries out for yours. No more waiting, no more fear." Nessa's heart swelled. The fear was a distant memory. All she felt was the overwhelming rightness of this moment, of this man, of this bond that had guided her to her true self. She nodded, her eyes shining. No more fear. Before the entire pack, he lowered his head to the juncture of her neck and shoulder. She tilted her head, granting him access. She felt his hot breath on her skin, then the sharp, brief sting of his fangs as he bit down, marking her as his. It was not a violent act. It was a seal, a sacrament. A wave of pure, ecstatic energy surged through her, 1,000 times more powerful than the flare of her awakening. It was not her power, or his, but theirs. The bond snapped into its final, perfect place. A torrent of images, memories, and emotions flooded her mind. She felt his lonely childhood, his brutal training, the crushing weight of his crown, the centuries of his bloodline's solitude. She felt the hollow ache of his soul searching for her. And he, in turn, felt her life. The fear, the hunger, the cold, the singular act of desperate kindness that had changed everything. He felt her strength, her resilience, her brilliant, compassionate heart. When he pulled back, the 2 small marks on her neck glowed with a soft, golden light. before fading into her skin, leaving a permanent, invisible brand upon her soul. They looked at each other, and for the first time they truly saw. There were no more secrets, no more doubts. They were one. A spontaneous howl of celebration and acceptance rose from the pack, a thunderous, joyous chorus that shook the very foundations of Blackwood Keep. They were hailing their Alpha King and their new luminary queen. 3 months later, Nessa stood on the high balcony of Ronan's, of their chambers, looking out over the kingdom. The land was changing. The fields on the edge of the domain, once struggling, were now lush and green. The people who had lived under the shadow of their king's simmering rage were now more at ease, more hopeful. Her light, anchored and tempered by his strength, was healing the realm. Strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and a familiar, solid chest pressed against her back. Ronan rested his chin on her shoulder, his scent of pine and winter a constant comfort. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured into her hair. "How a piece of stale bread could change the world," she answered softly, leaning back into his embrace. He chuckled, a low, warm sound that vibrated through her. "It was not the bread, my love. It was the hand that offered it." He placed one of his large hands over her still flat stomach. "Elspeth was here this morning." Nessa smiled, turning in his arms to face him. "I know. She told me." Ronan's golden eyes were bright with a fierce, protective joy. "Twins," he breathed, his voice thick with awe. "A boy and a girl." "One for the shadow, one for the light," Nessa whispered, placing her own hand over his. "Perfectly balanced, like us," he agreed. He bent his head and captured her lips in a kiss that was both deeply tender and fiercely possessive. It was a kiss of promises fulfilled and futures begun. She was no longer a victim, no longer a prisoner, no longer a girl hiding from a world that had hurt her. She was a queen, a mate, a mother. She was home. And in the arms of her Alpha King, her wolf, her Ronan, she was finally, completely, and incandescently whole. Thank you so much for listening to this story on His Wolf Knew First. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe so you never miss a new tale. Drop a comment below telling me which moment moved you the most. Your support truly means the world to me, and I'll see you in the next story on His Wolf Knew First.